We've been putting words on the page since Gutenberg introduced movable type, and Photoshop lets us do some amazing things with a minimum of fuss. Let's get started. Although best known as a tool for editing images, Photoshop lets you do a lot of creative things with type. Let's take a look at some of the basic options for adding words to a document. We're going to begin in our Chapter 7 folder, and we'll select the file New Type. Now if you get a warning message when you open this file asking you to update layers, you can simply hit the Update button. This file was created on a PC, and moving from Mac to PC with a lot of typefaces can sometimes be a little tricky, but if you simply hit Update, you'll be fine. Now in order to start typing, you have to select the Type tool. That's located in the Tools panel, and its icon is the letter T. That is also the shortcut you use to select this tool. If I click and hold on the icon, you can see that we have 4 separate tools available here. A horizontal type tool, vertical, and then we have 2 mask tools. We're going to talk about the mask tools towards the end of this lesson, but for now we're going to start with the horizontal type tool. With the type tool selected, I want to point out a couple of features in the options bar. Here we can choose the typeface that we're using. If you click on the pull down triangle, you have a listing of all the active fonts in your computer. Next to that, we can choose our font style. Here we can choose between italic, bold, or even bold italic. This is where we choose our type size. Right now we're set to 12 points. I'm going to increase this so that as I start typing you can actually see it on screen. To the right of that we have our anti-alias options. Right now we're going to leave it at its default setting of sharp. Now the easiest way to add type is simply to click and start typing. When you finish typing and are ready to commit, you can move to the options bar and click on this checkmark icon to commit. The keyboard shortcut for that is simply to press the Enter key. As soon as you click with the type tool, Photoshop automatically creates a brand new layer. In our layers panel you can see at the very top a new layer. There is a T in the middle of that layer icon, and that signifies a type layer. Photoshop automatically names this layer based on the words you type. Because the type exists on a completely separate layer, we're free to move it around. Simply bring your mouse over the type, hold down the Command key on the Mac, Control key on the PC. You can see the cursor change to an arrow, and we can simply move that type around. If you need to edit your type, simply click inside the type. We've got our blinking cursor, and now we're free to add or edit that type any way we want. I'm going to hit the Enter key on the numeric keypad to commit to that change. If we want to change the type size, we can simply go up to the options bar, and instead of 60, I'll choose 48, make it a bit smaller. Another way to change the type size is to take your mouse, click on the type, again hold down the Command key on the Mac, Control key on the PC. You'll see we have a bounding box. We'll move to this upper right corner. I'll start to drag, and as I drag I'll hold down the Shift key. What that's going to do is automatically scale the type up or down as I drag to make the box bigger or smaller. I'm again going to hit the Enter key to commit. Here's a great way to cycle between different typefaces. With our layer selected, you can see in the Layers panel that Photoshop CS5 is highlighted in blue. I'm going to click in the Font menu box. Verdana is now highlighted. I'm going to use the up and down arrow keys on the keyboard to cycle through some of the fonts loaded on my system. This is the Verdana typeface. We'll go to Trebuchet, Trojan Pro, and you can see that you can quickly preview what different fonts will look like. We can easily delete a type layer in Photoshop. I'm going to move over to the Layers panel. We can see that our Photoshop CS5 type layer is active. It's highlighted in blue. And I'll move down to the trash can icon and simply press it. And there we go, no more type layer. If we want to add a block of type instead of just a few words, that's easy to do as well. In the document window, with the type tool, we are simply going to click and drag. And you can see we now have the outlines of a text box. Whatever type we enter will remain inside the constraints of this box. I'm going to cancel this we'll move up to the options bar and click the cancel button. The keyboard shortcut for this is Command period on the Mac, Control period on the PC, because I have already created a text box. In the Layers panel, I'm going to turn on the visibility of this type layer called Alice. If I click, you can now see the boundaries of our text box. I'm going to reduce the size of this text. First, I'll press the Enter key to commit, then move up in the options bar and select a much smaller type size. There we go. Now we can see all of our type inside that box. Again, if I click inside the box, we can see the boundaries, and we can freely change the shape of this box. If I hold the mouse over this middle box, I can drag it out. The type will automatically reflow around the boundaries of the box. If I go to the upper right corner, hold down the Command key on the Mac, Control key on the PC, click and drag while holding the Shift key at the same time. Again, I can reduce the size of the type. It will get smaller. If I drag this back up, it will get bigger. I'm going to hit the Enter key again to commit. The last thing I want to do here is create a type mask. I'm going to go over to the Tools panel, click and hold on the Type tool, and select Horizontal Type Mask tool. Now, to make the mask, I want the point size to be much higher than it is now, but the first thing I need to do is take the focus off of this existing type layer. I'm simply going to go to the Layers panel and click the background to make it active. Now I'm going to change the type size. I'm going to go all the way up to 72. Our Horizontal Type Mask tool is selected, and I'm simply going to click and start typing. I'll press the Enter key to commit. Now, instead of type, we simply have outlines waiting to be filled. Let's go up to the Edit menu, select Fill, and I'm going to use a pattern. Any pattern will do. I'm choosing one of the default patterns that ships with Photoshop, and I'll simply press OK. I'll hide the marching ants by pressing the keyboard shortcut Command H on the Mac, Control H on the PC. Now we can see that our selection has been filled with that pattern that we chose. The big difference between the Type Mask tool and the other tool we've been using is that Type Mask is applied directly onto a layer. We have not created a new type layer. This is now a part of the background layer. In our very next lesson, we're going to use this same file, so I'd like for you to keep it open. Putting type on a document is just the first step. Let's explore the options available for fine-tuning with Photoshop's typography controls. We're beginning this lesson with the document we had open from the previous lesson. If yours is not on screen, you can find this in the Chapter 7 folder. Simply open the file titled New Type. We're going to create a new document. We're going to go up to the File menu, select New, and in the New dialog box, we want our new document to have the same dimensions and resolution as our new type TIFF file. So under Preset, instead of default Photoshop size, we're going to select their file name. Photoshop will list all your open files here down at the bottom of this list. Now we're guaranteed to have two files of matching size. I'm going to separate these files into their own floating document windows because I want you to be able to see these two side by side. I'm going to reduce the size of this to fit it a little better into the window, and the same thing for our new document. What we're going to do now is copy a layer from one file to the other. So we're going to click to activate our new type file, and we're going to go to the Layers panel and simply click on this top type layer, drag it over our new layer, and before we release the mouse, we're going to hold the Shift key. That will align it exactly the way it looks in our original file. And there we go. We now have our type layer in our brand new file. We can close this new type file and we don't need to save it. I'll make the size of this a little bit bigger. And let's increase the type a bit. That looks good. Now, how can we make adjustments to this type? We're going to go to the Window menu and select Paragraph. That opens up a paragraph and a character panel. We're going to look at Paragraph first. This first row of icons determines how our paragraph is going to be aligned. The default is a left align. If I click this center, our paragraph is now centered. And if we click right, it is now right aligned. What does it align to? Well, I'll click inside here. It aligns to our bounding text box. I'm going to move this entire panel down. Get it out of the way. That's much better. What we can also control in this paragraph tab is the justification. I'm going to set this back to a left align. Right now, we have a left aligned paragraph, meaning that all the characters are flush along the left end of the box, but they're staggered along the right. If we click this first justification icon, our words now flow from the left to the right edge of the text box. This second icon will leave our full justification, but the bottom line of the paragraph, it will center it instead. So you can see that change to the bottom line. Our third option here is again going to retain full justification, but it is going to right align the very last line of the paragraph. Our final option here is simply going to take that last line and stretch it out all the way from left to right. We're going to set it back to our initial state. And now we're going to look at the indent features. If I click here on this left indent, the default is at 0. If I type in 40, the whole paragraph indents 40 points from the left edge. I'll set that back to 0. If we move over here to the right, we can change the indent along the right. If I type in a 40 here, we now have a 40-point inset from the right side of our text box. Reset this. We can also choose to indent just the first line of the paragraph. I'll select this and type in 40, and you see just the first line of that paragraph is indented. Again, we'll reset it back to 0. These final two options at the bottom are our before and after spaces. When we have multiple paragraphs, these are going to determine how much space is in between each paragraph. To take a look at that, I need to open up this box. I'll drag it down so now we have the end of our first paragraph, the beginning of our second paragraph. If I click anywhere in the first paragraph and change this after space, we're going to see a difference in the spacing between our first and second paragraph. There we go. If I hit 40, we increase that after space. Instead of increasing the after space of the top paragraph, I could click in the second paragraph and change the before space. If I change that to 40, we'll see the same visual effect. This second paragraph is set to a right align. I'm going to reset this to a left align paragraph. Let's take a look at the character formatting options. We're going to click on the Character tab. Now the options here are only going to take effect on areas of text that we manually select. So the first thing we're going to do is select some text. I'll choose the first few words of this second paragraph. Now a lot of these should look familiar. We can change the typeface here. We can change the font style if we want to make it italic or make it bold. We can change the type size. So if we wanted just these first 4 words to be a larger type size, I'll simply click on the icon and I could change this from 30 to 40. I'll go and change this back. To the right we have our leading option. This controls the spacing between lines within a paragraph. In most cases you're going to be best off leaving it to auto because that way Photoshop will adjust the leading based on your type size. Below leading we have our tracking option. This increases spacing between both letters and words. So if I start with the default value of 0 and increase it, you can see that I now have more space within the area of text that was selected. I'll set this back to 0. Kerning is similar to tracking except it only increases the letter spacing. So we're going to place the cursor in between 2 letters, click, and then I'll simply increase the space here. We'll go up to 160, but you can see that the spacing is only increased between the I and the D. We'll set this back to its default of metrics. At the bottom we have Vertical and horizontal scaling. We'll start with vertical scaling first. If I select the word considering here and change vertical scaling to, let's say, 150%, you can see now it's going to stretch that word. The same thing will happen if we go and change the horizontal scaling. It will widen that word. The last option here is baseline shift. Now this can come in handy. I'll select this entire first line. Baseline shift will move a line of words up or down. So if I click to select it and increase the value in the baseline shift box, the entire line has shifted up. I can bring the line down by entering a negative number and make it shift down closer to the second line. I'll put this back to 0. You can see that Photoshop gives us tons of options to change not only paragraphs, but individual characters. There's no rule that says your type has to flow along a straight line. In this lesson, we'll learn how to add type that runs along more creative shapes. First, I'm going to take this character and paragraph panel and dock it up here to free up some screen space. Now let's go to our Chapter 7 folder and open up the file labeled Type 2. I'm going to press the F key to cycle through to the full screen mode with menu bar. We're going to talk about paths in an upcoming chapter, but I'd like to show you how to make type run along a path. Go to the Window menu, scroll down and select Paths. You can see that in this file I've already created a path titled Curve. We're simply going to click on it to activate it. I'll zoom in a little bit on the image document. With the Type tool selected, watch what happens as my cursor goes right at the intersection of this path. You can see a little double bent line icon. That means that if we click, we are going to type along this path. Okay, so we've clicked, our type is running along the path. If we need to edit the type, clean up some mistakes, we simply click with the mouse and make our corrections. And let's make this a lowercase o. Now, if I hold down the Command key on the Mac, Control key on the PC, watch what happens to my cursor. You can see that I now have a right-facing arrow. This means that I can now move the type along the path. So I'm simply going to click and drag. I can move the text all the way to the right. I could drag it back to center it in the middle of this path. If I click and drag down, I can flip and invert the type and make it go underneath the path. We'll set it back here right on top. There's another way that we can change the shape of text. I'm going to go to our Layers panel, turn off this layer, and turn on the existing layer above it. Let's scroll down so we can get a good view. Let's close this Paths panel. If I click inside this text, you'll see that we've got a text box similar to what we had in the previous lesson. But in the Options bar, I'm going to go and click the Warp Text icon. Now we're going to have some options. Under Style, it's set to None, but let's go and choose the first option, Arc. You can see that it's skewing and stretching the text to fit in that shape. We can choose the amount of bend that this has. If I drag it to the left, the bend will move in the opposite direction. I can change the horizontal distortion. I can change the vertical distortion. I'm going to put all of these back to their defaults. Let's see what other styles we have. We can make this a bulge, a flag, and my personal favorite, the fish. So lots of ways that we can change how text is displayed inside Photoshop. I'm going to hit OK to commit to this change. And note that I can still click inside here and edit text. The text is still on a separate layer. Notice in the Layers panel now, the icon has changed to show that we have a warp text layer. So you can see that there are plenty of ways that we can manipulate text inside Photoshop. Layer effects are some of the most fun to use features inside Photoshop. In this lesson, we'll leave plain, boring text behind and see how to spice up any typeface. Let's get started, as always, in our Chapter 7 folder, and let's open the file Type 1. Now, if you get a warning message when you open this file asking you to update layers, you can simply hit the Update button. If you didn't get a warning message there, you may see a warning icon in your Layers panel on this text layer titled 6. Simply double-click on that warning icon, then hit the Enter key to commit to that updating, and you're fine. This file was created on a PC, and moving from Mac to PC with a lot of typefaces can sometimes be a little tricky, but if you simply hit Update, you'll be fine. I'm going to take us into full screen mode with menu bar by pressing the F key on the keyboard, and I'll zoom into 50% here. That's Command plus on the Mac, Control plus on the PC. And you can see we've got a fake promotional poster here. I'll confess that you may not shed pounds, look younger, or have a happier life after watching this training series, but you will be better at Photoshop. This document is chock full of text layers. How do we know that? Well, a quick visit to the Layers panel shows a ton of individual text layers. And what can we do with them? Well, before we add layer effects, what I'd like to do is add some color to these fonts. That will give us many more options when we apply layer effects. And here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to click on the very top text layer and then shift click on this third layer so that all three layers are highlighted and selected. That means that any change I make to one text layer will automatically be applied to the other. So I'm going to now open my character panel. If your character panel is not here in the dock from previous lessons, simply go to the window menu and select character. What I'd like to do is change the color. I'm going to simply click in this color swatch box. Here's my color picker, and I'm going to type in new RGB values. I want a dark gray instead of black, so I'm going to type 80 for the red, hit the tab key, 80 for green, tab again, and 80 for blue. Hit the return key to invoke the OK button, and now our top three layers of type are dark gray instead of black. Now let's do something about this shed pounds type. I'm simply going to click to highlight it in the Layers panel. Again, I'm going to go and click in this color box, but now we're going to do something very cool. For design consistency, I'd like for the headline type to take on a color that already exists in the image. So if I move my mouse over the image area, notice that as it hovers over this sleeve, the icon turns into an eyedropper, and if I simply click, this color from the shirt is applied to the text. I'll hit OK. Let's go down to Look Younger. I'll click on that layer to activate it. Again, click in the color swatch box, and this time I'm going to pick a blue from the shirt, a lighter tone of blue right about there. Looks pretty good. I'll simply hit OK. And be happier, we can't leave that alone. I'll click to select it in the Layers panel. This time I'm going to select a much brighter color. In fact, I'll pick up the white from this t-shirt. Notice that it's not a completely neutral white. It's got a hint of blue in it, but that's going to add a nice subtle touch to this design. I'll hit OK. Now we have some color to work with. The very first layer effect we're going to use is the most common, and that is a drop shadow. So let's go and click on the Adobe Photoshop CS5 Extended. That type is very big there, and it will be easy to see these results on screen. I'm going to zoom in at 100% view. That's Command 1 on the Mac, Control 1 on the PC. And I'm pressing the space bar to temporarily invoke the hand tool so that I can move this text to an area where you can see it. I'll close this character panel. And with my text layer selected, I'm simply going to go down to the bottom of the Layers panel and click on the Layer Effects icon. This brings up our Layer Effects menu, and I'm going to choose the drop shadow. This brings up the Layer Style dialog, and you can see a number of settings all at their default values. You're almost never going to want to use these defaults. They're very, very heavy-handed. So what I'm going to do is drop this opacity down to about 20%. So I'll move the slider here just about there. Looks pretty good. Next, I'll move down to the distance slider. As I drag it to the right, notice that the shadow moves further away from the text. We don't want to go that far, so I'll bring it back down and end up right around 6. That looks pretty good. If I drag the spread slider to the right, you can see the drop shadow spread out. We don't want to go too far with that either. I'll bring that down to about 5 or 6%, somewhere around there. We don't want to make a big move. And for size, we're going to leave this at the default. I'll show you what happens if you drag it to the right. When you keep going to the right, you simply obliterate any definition in there. So we're going to leave this right back at the default of 5, and we've got a nice, subtle, yet effective drop shadow. The last thing we'll do here is change the angle. You simply click on this line and rotate it around the circle. This changes the angle of the drop shadow in relation to the text. You can drag it to any angle that you desire. I think here let's try to look for something about 111. Maybe let's boost it up just a bit, right about in the 170 range, 173. That looks great. And I'll simply hit OK. We have a nice, believable drop shadow. Now we have the total training line above this and the with host Amadou Diallo text line. If we want to apply this drop shadow to these other lines of text, instead of clicking on drop shadow and going back into the menu and remembering our settings and reapplying them, watch what we can do. I'm going to hold down the Option key on the Mac, Alt key on the PC, click on the word effects, and I'm going to simply drag this up onto the top layer. Now that drop shadow has been copied from our second text layer up to the first one. I can do the same thing, Option key on the Mac, Alt key on the PC, and drag this down to the with host Amadou Diallo layer. So now all 3 layers have the exact same settings for our drop shadow. That's a huge time saver. We don't have to start from scratch each and every time we work. I will show you an alternative way to be equally as efficient. If I double click on the word drop shadow, it'll bring back my dialog box, and at the very bottom, if you find yourself working with the same layer style values over and over, you can simply press this Make Default button, and every time you create a new drop shadow, it will start with these settings as opposed to the factory defaults. If you later change your mind and want to go back to those factory defaults, simply press the Reset to Default button. I'll press Cancel here because we didn't actually make either of those changes. Now that drop shadows are out of the way, I'm going to take you through some other layer effects that are very, very cool. You'll see in a moment that there are a lot of layer effects to choose from. I'm not going to take you through each and every one, but I will show you the ones that are most effective when working with text. I'm going to scroll down in my Layers panel and let's select the Shed Pounds text layer. Here we're going to add another layer effect, and this time we are going to start with an inner shadow. I'll move this box out of the way, and you can see the dramatic change that inner shadow applies to our text. We're going to leave opacity where it is. We'll leave the blend mode untouched. The distance, if I drag this to the right, you can see that it's actually moving that inner shadow away from our original text. We don't want to go too far with that. We'll leave it right here about 6 or 7. 7 doesn't look bad, so we'll leave it there. We have a choke slider. If I drag this to the right, it will add an almost beveled look. It restricts the original text color. We don't want to go too far with this either, so I'm going to back it off and leave it right about there at a value of 8. The size, as we did with the drop shadow, I'm going to leave that at its default. I will move the angle here a little bit. Maybe I'll come down just about there, for example. Just give it a nice bit of shading. Now in this text layer, I'm going to add a second layer effect. I'm going to click on Bevel and Emboss. I'd like to point out that 2 things happen when you click on the name of a layer effect. You get a check in the checkbox on the left. That means the effect is being applied, but you also have the settings for that layer effect show up directly to the right. What we're going to do is set Style instead of Inner Bevel. We're going to set that to Emboss. We're going to change the depth here. I want to get a little bit more embossed look there. Look at that. Look at what happens if we go very far. I'm not going to take it that high, but somewhere around here looks pretty good. I'm going to leave the bulk of the settings here at their defaults, but I am going to go down under shading. Highlight mode is set to screen. I'm going to set that to multiply. I want a dark edge around the outside of the text. There we go. I'm going to hit OK. And now, by just selecting a couple of options, we have a vastly different rendering of text. If you want to see the before and after, I can simply go here to Effects and toggle this eye icon on and off. Here is the plain text. Here is the text with our layer effects. Let's go down to this second headline type, Look Younger. What can we do with this? Well, first we'll select it in the Layers panel. And this time, we're going to take a look at Outer Glow. I'll slide the image over here to the left to get a better view of it. With Outer Glow, we're going to leave our blend mode at the default of screen. We'll leave opacity and noise at their defaults. Here I've got a nice sort of bright yellow color. If you have a different color here, I want you to click on this color swatch and simply type in these RGB values, 255 red, 255 green, and 190 for the blue, and then simply hit OK. Down here under Elements, I want you to make sure your technique is set to softer, and we're going to change the spread value here. As we drag to the right, we get more of a glow. It spreads out further, and we want to go pretty far with this. We want to make this change very obvious. 43% looks pretty good. And now we're going to look at yet another amazing layer effect, the gradient overlay. Again, I mentioned that if I click on the text gradient overlay, I see my options. If I wanted to add it without seeing the options, I would simply click this checkbox. But let's click on the text gradient overlay so that we can manipulate this default setting. I'm going to change the blend mode here. Instead of normal, I'm going to set it to screen. That's going to be a nice blend between our original text color, which was the blue that we pulled into the shirt. We have a nice gradient here, but this is a linear gradient. We are going to click on Style and change that to Reflected, and watch what happens. Right now, the gradient is light at the top and dark at the bottom, but if I change it to Reflected, you can see this gives us a mirrored effect. The gradient is now starting at the top and the bottom of the text. I'm going to adjust my scale slider here. If I drag scale to the right, you can see that I've compressed the gradient. There are much fewer areas of white. So let's go back down to the left. Right about there looks pretty good. And you can see that I've expanded the highlights. Gives me a much more dramatic effect. And I'm going to hit OK. Let's move over here so we can take a look at our last headline type, Be Happier. I'm going to select that in the Layers panel. And here, when we work with white text, we're limited with the layer effects. Many of them require a color in order to show a visible change, but I'm going to show you a layer effect that will work on any color. This time, under Effects, I'm going to choose Stroke. Let's move things around a bit so we can see our text. There we go. What I'm going to do here is change the size of the stroke. That's a little bit heavy. I'm just going to come down 1 point to 2. So I'll type a 2 in there instead of a 3. That way we still have a little bit of air between the letters. For position, this stroke is on the outside of the typeface. I could set it inside. That would, in a sense, cut the typeface. I could set it to the center and split the difference. I'll leave this to outside. One last thing I'll do here is move down in the Fill Type box. I'll leave it set to color, but I want to change the color of that stroke, so I'm going to click in the color swatch box. I'll move this box down out of the way. Our screen is getting very crowded. Notice that as I move the mouse over the image area, I have again an eyedropper, so I'm going to click here in the upper right on this shirt, and now I have a blue stroke color. I'll hit OK to accept that color, and I'll hit OK to get out of the layer style dialog. And let's do a fit view to screen. That's Command 0 on the Mac, Control 0 on the PC. And let's take a look at how far we've come. I'll drag this over to the left, and let's go to our history panel. Here is the image that we started with, plain boring text, and here's where we ended up with layer effects plus a bit of color. We've only begun to scratch the surface of what's possible using layer effects, and now that this lesson is over, I'd like for you to keep this image on screen and experiment. Go through the layer effects options, try different settings, see what you can come up with all on your own.